Members will form a quorum. May I call the meeting to order? Welcome to the meeting. First is confirmation of minutes of our meeting dated the 3rd of March 2017. So far, we've not received any proposal for amendments. Can we confirm the minutes, please? Thank you. Second, information papers issued since the last meeting. We have one. Please refer to the agenda. Item 3 is the agenda for our next meeting, scheduled for this 17th of July, Monday at 8:30. There are two suggestions. Legislative proposal to mandate marine vessels to use compliant fuel within Hong Kong waters, and second, review of the 6th Technical Memorandum for allocation of emission allowances for power plants. I think you are familiar with item 2. So any objection to these two proposed items? If not, that will be the agenda for our next meeting. Item 4, please invite the administration to join us. We have Ms. Christine Low, Acting Secretary for the Environment, Mr. Vincent Liu, Deputy Secretary for the Environment, Mr. Francis Chang, Assistant Director, EPD. Right. As well as Mr. Alfred Sitt, Deputy Director, EMSD, Mr. Norman Hung, C&ED, and also Mr. Edwin Lai, Assistant Director of the Hong Kong Observatory. So they're here to discuss with us the Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan 2030. We've got a paper from the administration as well as a background brief from the Secretariat, a submission from a scholar from CUHK, and a submission from WWF, and also a joint submission from a few green groups. Administration, please walk us through the paper with the assistance of a PowerPoint. Ms. Low. Thank you, Chairman. Climate change is almost about anything. You might have already read our 2030 action plan, and you see that it covers a big variety of areas. I will give you a brief introduction, and if you'd like to discuss submissions from the professor, and also green groups will be happy to do that. In January this year, the administration announced the Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan 2030, and also launched a series of publicity activities. We have decided to set a target to reduce our carbon intensity by 65 to 7% by 2030 compared with the 2005 level, which is equivalent to an absolute reduction of 26 to 36%. To achieve that, we have to gradually reduce coal-fired generation. That is, most of the coal-fired generating units will have to be replaced by cleaner generating units. For renewable energy, we're going to promote the wider use of RE. Under the scheme of control with the two power companies, there will be feed-in tariff, FIT, and also the RE certificates. The government will offer incentives to encourage the two power companies to develop RE and to promote the development of distributed RE. For government buildings, for new schools and educational buildings, new open space and public park projects, and the roof space of government buildings, we have raised the RE target for these buildings. For existing government buildings, where technically and physically feasible, we will incorporate RE technologies upon retrofitting of renovation works. And where appropriate, display panels will be installed to show the amount of RE generated to promote the concept of RE to the public. We've also reserved $200 million for departments to implement small-scale RE projects. The WSC is now carrying out a pilot project at Shed Peak Reservoir involving floating photovoltaic or PV panel, and a similar trial will be conducted at the Plover Cove Reservoir. We will also greatly promote energy saving. The two power companies will increase the funds to the energy efficiency funds to carry out retrofitting and retro-commissioning, and then it will also be expanded to cover non-residential buildings. The power companies will use incentives to set up new funds to support other energy efficiency and energy saving initiatives, for instance, to encourage consumers to use more energy efficient electrical appliances, and to support green buildings and other programs to support the disadvantaged groups. We have got 5-year targets for energy saving for two power companies. If they can cut that by 4%, there will be a reward. The two power companies will introduce a scheme to reduce maximum demand. In the public sector, we have reserved no less than $500 billion to assist government departments and bureaus to carry out energy-saving measures, initiatives. We are also committed to using district cooling system in new development areas. We already have one in the Kai Tak development, and the same will be done in other NDAs and redevelopment areas. And for carbon audit, starting from this year, we will have regular carbon audits for government major buildings. We have also issued a set of 9 carbon audit guide books covering different types of premises to provide guidance to buildings and apartments and the private sector to carry out carbon audits. For transport, we adopt a multi-pronged approach. We will try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transport, and expanding our railway network is a key element. We will also promote the use of electric vehicles to help improve roadside air pollution and reduce GHG emissions. Going forward, we will continue to promote cycling and walking to reduce the use of mechanized transport. We intend to enhance the walkability of Hong Kong. The TD is going to conduct a consultancy study on enhancing walkability in Hong Kong. For adaptation measures, last year, a working group on climate change working group on infrastructure was set up so as to respond to the impact on infrastructure by climate change. We're now reviewing our standards and we're trying to enhance the resilience of infrastructure under works departments. We're carrying out strategic design to consider the response ability of our infrastructure faced with extreme weather. The EMSD has got a series of measures to tackle climate change. It's planning to identify concrete-lined river channels with high potential opportunity for revitalization. And for the WSC, it will promote water sources and extend the seawater network for toilet flushing. It is also developing new water resources, including seawater desalination, reclaimed water, and grey water reuse. At There is also the Hong Kong 2030. It has recommended a green, smart and resilient city strategy to respond to climate change, such as extreme weather, flooding and sea level rise. On green building, the Buildings Department has got a consultant to revise the current arrangements to require buildings to attain a certain environmental protection performance before they can apply for GFA concessions. Other departments are carrying out various taking various measures to address the problems associated with climate change. On publicity, we have launched APIs, issued leaflets, short videos, posters, and so forth to promote this. And we've also reserved $10 million for non-profit making organizations to carry out public education activities and projects within the theme of climate change. And we have also got the 40th Charter, and the Education Bureau and the Hong Kong Observatory have respectively organized competitions and activities to promote this idea. Thank you. We have to hand over the venue to the next panel, IEHLS panel, at 4:30 sharp. So we have to be very tight today, and each member will have 4 minutes. First, Mr. Kenneth Chen, Leung. Thank you. This fit-in tariff, FIT, has been discussed for a long time, and that is to encourage the private sector to invest in distributed RE. RE is rather costly. Recently, Macau has got a fit-in tariff of around $4. Without FIT, the private sector will simply not invest in RE. Both Macau and other countries will use 20 years and multiply it by FIT, and that will be more or less the investment cost or the buyback cost. So I'd like to know the progress in Hong Kong, and when will FIT be introduced, and what factors will be taken into account in setting FIT. Perhaps Vincent can supplement later. In Hong Kong, under the new SEAs, we have an FIT provision. That's the most important point. And we know that the new SEAs will only take effect in 2018. From now until then, we will have to discuss with the two power companies what should be the level of FIT. As said by Mr. Leung, if it is too low, it will not be attractive enough for the private sector, so it will be a waste of time. So we are keen to make it happen. So if you ask us now exactly what will be the FIT, well, we have yet to start our negotiation with the two power companies. So it's hard for me to give you a figure, but we want to ensure that the level is attractive enough for the private sector. I don't know whether Vincent has anything to add. The FIT will be regarded as fuel cost. So when we discuss with the two power companies the level of FIT, we have to take into account a few things. First, the cost. The cost for installing the facilities, and second, whether it is attractive enough to the investor, and second, the impact on our power supply. So 3 things. We are discussing with the 2 power companies the detailed arrangements. We hope that come early next year or later this year, we will have some proposals for the Energy Advisory Committee to discuss. We hope to launch the scheme in 2019, roughly.
Have the 2 companies supply you with a plan to let you know what is going to be their capital expenditure? I'm not talking about the online users. If they were to accommodate so much fit-in, do they have an estimate on their capex? Basically, it's more about their operating cost. The capital expenditure really is to be incurred by the power generator. Now, how much higher will the operating cost is going to be? We have to look into details. I would like to remind everyone that please speak only in one language. This is to facilitate interpretation. I beg your pardon. Because earlier on we were talking about operating costs as well as fit-in tariff, and members have spoken in English. I think it is not about whether you are doing it, but it's about how much you are doing it. And of course, you are now setting out to do it, and you are saying that you're going to promote RE, but the action plan says that before 2030, 34% of the fuel mix would be accounted for by RE, or might be accounted for by RE. But this is not really your set target. Now, do you have a fixed target? Is it going to be 3 to 4%? We are already behind many advanced countries. For instance, Singapore, before 2020, they're going to achieve 8% PV RE, and Taiwan, 20%. And so, for 3 to 4%, is it going to only be a potential goal, or is it going to be a target? Now, we have not set out any target in the documentation because it is not practicable. But it doesn't mean that we are not going to have any targets at all. The reason why we are not putting down targets here, we have already given you an explanation. Now, compared to larger territories, for instance, Taiwan, it is really a whole territory. I think Hong Kong and Singapore are more comparable because we're talking about 2 comparable cities. Of course, we can be compared to Copenhagen as well, but different locations have got different potentials for the application of RE. And if you're talking about wind energy, and it's going to be 1.5% of our fuel mix. As for solar energy, and we have to identify suitable locations, and each of them is not going to be too large because of our constraint. If you're talking about government lands and government properties, we are going to maximize as much as possible the application of solar energy. As for private sector, we are going to bring in fit-in scheme in order to attract more users. But if you were to ask me, if today there were to be a fit-in tariff for Hong Kong, and if it is to be set up at an attractive level, then exactly how much can be done in terms of use of RE? I really can't give you a specific numbers. I have to explain to you why we cannot set down any target at this point in time. And the biggest possibility is held by PV panels. The reason why we cannot quantify them is very, very important. By 2018, we are going to bring in the fit-in tariff. And by then, we'll be able to gauge exactly how fast Hong Kong can move on this front. Because you're saying that this is not quantifiable. Actually, I think it is quantifiable. It all depends on how much support you're willing to give it, how much of a landscape you're going to create in order to promote it. Now, as for private sector use of PV panels, you say that this is the biggest possibility. As for fit-in tariff, you say that you're going to give us an announcement later on. But apart from fit-in tariff, what about village houses, and what about many potentially applicable government structures and other structures? And all those are potential candidates for application of solar energy. But of course, if solar panels are to be installed, it would involve a lot of technical costs and also a lot of operating technicality issues and so on and so forth. And so what kind of support and assistance you're going to offer these potential users so that they will find it more attractive to install solar panels? We believe that the biggest incentive would come from feed-in tariff. The biggest promoter of PV panels in Hong Kong is the government, and the biggest solar farm in Hong Kong is owned by the government. And after a certain period of time has passed, now because as technology matures and as our experience matures, then we would know by then better how fast we can move. And that's why we cannot give you a quantifiable target today. Mr. Chan Huk-keung, the government has already set down a target for emission reduction by 2030, but for the reduction of GHG, the reduction is only going to be 26% to 56%, and the carbon intensity reduction is only going to be around 60%. And we believe that these targets are not satisfactory because carbon emission has increased by 10% between 2005 and 2014. And so what measures will you take in order to make sure that you can reach targets by 2030? And have you examined why emission total numbers have not come down but actually have gone up in the past? And the government says that it is not prepared to come up with a target at this point in time for RE application, and this is very disappointing because you are the policy bureau. If you don't have a target, then it would be very difficult for you to come up with a relevant policy. And just now, the secretary said that the government in Hong Kong has already done a lot in promoting the use of solar panels. But if you look at what's happening on mainland, you know that actually they are miles ahead of us. And at present, we are still stuck with a floating PV panel test at a reservoir, and we are really way behind. And village houses have got a lot of rooftop space that can be used for solar panel installation. And apart from that, there are a lot of spaces that could be used. For instance, restored landfill sites, and no structures can be put on those spaces. And so those would be very good candidate for installation solar panel. And what about the new PV panels that can be installed at an oblique angle on the surface of a structure instead of totally flat? So have you considered those new PV panels? So do you have the determination? Of course, we have the determination, but it all depends on progress of things before you are at a point where you can set down targets. Now, just now the question is that how can we make sure that by 2030 we can indeed reach the carbon intensity reduction target? Now, by 2020, our absolute target is reduction of 20%, because right now we are going to switch from coal fire generation to liquid natural gas generation, and this already is being done, and this definitely will happen. As for why, there is a range being given 26% to 36% reduction. Now, it is to allow us flexibility to look at what other places have done and are able to do, so that we have an idea as to how much we can do. Now, I'm not boasting what Hong Kong has already achieved. I'm just being realistic here. So you cannot say that we are not being ambitious. Of course, on the mainland, they are a huge promoter for RE. And as for reservoir testing, it's been done in London and Tokyo, and mainland is already doing it. But in Hong Kong, it's never been done before. The reservoirs, of course, are public properties. And after the reservoir test is being done, then we would know where is the optimal location for PV panels and how much will it cost. And then we'll be able to tell you how much of our reservoir space can be used for PV panels. As for buildings, indeed, certain new technologies have allowed PV panels to be stuck to the outer walls, but the technology is still not yet mature. And we understand that EMSD is doing a study to see what is the scope of potential application of this type of new technology. Right, if I have time, I'm going to ask you a similar question. Okay, Mr. Leung Yu-chung. There are many factors leading to climate change, and air quality, of course, is one of the factors. And our next agenda item is on air quality, and so I will defer that to the next item. But back to the problem of climate change, it has to be attacked on all fronts. And switching fuel mix and use of RE, of course, is one way out. And transportation is also a very important aspect, because 16% of GHG is accounted for by transport emission. Now, if you want our community to become greener, of course, you would want people to use more bicycles instead of cars, and also you don't want huge slabs of buildings blocking air ventilation. But if you look at our 10 planning standards and guidelines, they are all outdated. Now, for bicycle parking spaces, you are still following the old guidelines, and so they are really not up to date at all. They cannot follow the latest changes in time.
Regarding walking and cycling, we've discussed this with this panel before. The Planning Department and the Security and the Development Bureau know where how we can work more on this. And I'm not asking you to tell us a lot, but other departments, do they have this intention to modernize the standards? Because we have talked about a few communities, and the standards are very dated, so they cannot catch up with latest developments. So my request is very simple. Can you update the standards? Try if you can answer. If not, we refer to the Security Bureau. I'll refer to the Security Bureau. I mean, Development Bureau. But if your department doesn't push it, then they will develop a community according to the community needs. They will not care about the air quality. So if you ask another department to do it, I don't think you can address the problem, because you want a green community. You want to do away with buildings of oil effect, and you want more bicycle parking spaces. In NDAs, in my discussion with the DB and Development Bureau, and also the THB, I think they understand, and in older areas it's a bit hard to tackle. And if you want to change the arrangement of parking spaces for bicycles, the policy direction of the Environment Bureau is to ask other departments to consider air pollution and carbon emission, but it's not for us to be responsible for implementation. Now, Kai-Tak is a new community. How can you ensure that you can achieve your targets there? Kai-Tak is an example. What do you have to say about Kai-Tak? Is Kai-Tak a green community from your point of view? Will you regard it as a green community? I think we need the Development Bureau to come here for another discussion, because there are many new measures in there. Thank you. Mr. or Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Many people in Hong Kong are very eager to save energy and reduce emission. I welcome the new initiatives here. In particular, I like to thank you for accepting my proposal to make Hong Kong a walkable city. Now, feed-in tariff is a good idea, but we don't have too much information here. Whether a feed-in tariff can be successful or not would depend on the level and whether investors or individuals can have space to install RE facilities such as power generator. So what is the administration's target in the implementation of feed-in tariff? What is your discussion with the two power companies? Will relevant studies and calculations and data be made available for us before the feed-in tariff is introduced? Deputy Secretary. The feed-in tariff will be set with consideration to the cost of developing RE, whether it is attractive enough to private investors. And as regards the timetable, earlier next year there will be a public consultation on our draft proposals, hoping that in late 2018 and early 2019 we can launch feed-in tariff. That means you do not have any detailed objectives. We have some objectives for power companies to promote as far as possible. For instance, REs that can be fed into their network, and we will provide incentives. We want power companies to encourage private developers to develop distributed RE. We encourage power companies to streamline the procedures so that they can be completed more expeditiously. Yes, it is important that you have an agreement with the power companies. Now, if you want the PV panels on a rooftop, we have to get clearance from a few departments. Will the government offer any assistance? If you want to be connected to their grid, and if you have any problems, then EMSD has got guidelines available at their website. All right, EMSD, Mr. Sid, please. Thank you. Some technical information for Dr. Quat's question. 10 years or so, in village houses, there is the potential of using PV panel on rooftops. So we have approached relevant government departments, including the buildings department, to develop a guidebook to assist owners to install PV panels. And we've also got a list of contractors that can install PV panels to facilitate their choice of contractors. So that is a support for village houses. No, my question has got two parts. I will follow up afterwards. Mr. Frankie Yik. Director, would you like to talk about the floating PV panel? I can give you 2 minutes out of my time. Yes. It is said that they are vertical PV panel now. In fact, it is quite popular in recent years, but there are limitations. It is a film-like panel. So solar energy is transferred to energy, and efficiency about 5 to 8%. But For other types of PV panels, the efficiency can be up to 13 to 18%. Yes, vertical panels can be used, but the efficiency is much lower. And that means the return period may even be longer. What about reservoirs? It is still a pilot scheme. I know that a pilot project is being carried out by the WSD at Shek Pik Reservoir to consider the water quality impact. I understand that they're going to carry out a similar project at Plover Cove Reservoir, and as at today, the outcome has been very positive. Mr. Frankiek, greenhouse gas emissions from transport make up about 16% of the total emissions in Hong Kong. You may say this is high, but that is only 16%. I think the real culprits are the two power companies. The transport trade has done a lot at the request of the government to improve air quality. The replacement of converters by PLBs and taxis and using and all sorts of things, and all these will add to the operating costs of the industry. So when the government implements these measures, we hope that the administration can take into account the operation of the industry. Please try to minimize the impacts. They're always very supportive of the work of the government, because all of I was involved in all of the new measures introduced by the government. I have to do so because my constituents were crying out for help. So next time when there are new measures, if you don't mind, please talk to me so that we can have more information for the transport industry and your new measures can be implemented more smoothly. Recently, you're going to launch the domestic waste charging, and there are still a lot of outstanding items to iron out, and we welcome new measures, but please ensure good communication with us. Thank you. Dr. Junius Ho, Deputy Chairman. If Albert or Vincent can assist on the following issues. Members asked about the emission reduction targets. Now we're talking about 2030 plus. Each person will have to cut close to 3 tons of CO2 emission. So 3 tons multiplied by 7.2 million, that is close to 22 million cubic tons of carbon dioxide. And we're told that in the DCS, in Kai-Tak development, we'll be able to save 59,500 tons. And that means 85 million kilowatt hours energy saved. So the saving is 59,500 tons of CO2. That means we're going to save 367.5 of Kai-Tak area, and if we multiply it by 85 million kWh, that means we really have to save a lot. How much can solar energy help? I want some quantifiable data from the administration. Can you give us a chart for our information? If we want to achieve this level of carbon emission, do we really need 367 Kai-Tak developments, and how many units of electricity can be saved? 1 kilowatt of a pH panel. I believe the most successful one is the film the small film, and is close to 36% in efficiency. So 1 kWh can produce 1,000 units of electricity, depending on the amount of sunshine we get. So please give us some technical indicators for calculation so that we know how many rooftops are needed and how many reservoirs are needed. To achieve the savings. Okay?
As for the reduction target for 2030 for carbon emission, our hope is that the reduction is made possible by replacement of less polluting energy, because at present 70% of carbon emission is caused by power generation. The use of solar energy and a district cooling system, of course, will help, but it will help only to a smaller extent, and that's why in the past decade, in the coming decade or so, we have to progressively phase out the coal-fired generators so as to meet the target of 60 to 70% reduction. Thank you. Mr. Law Kun Chung. I'm very happy to see that Hong Kong is still within the Paris Agreement. But if you look at the overall action plan, I think it is rather conservative, because it seems that you are merely carrying forward a lot of older initiatives, and there really aren't that many new initiatives. The development of RE is not subject to any specific target or specific policies, and so the government will have to do better. As for liquefied natural gas, now when the two power companies were considering raising the tariff, they have already talked about the use of natural gas. I'd like to know, concerning the supply of natural gas, are we really overly reliant on supply from the mainland? Because I don't want this to become another case of water supply from Dongjiang River. And also, if the cost of supply really is fluctuating, then Hong Kong's tariff will also be subjecting to fluctuation. I've got another question about weather. Now, as for use of natural gas, indeed, we've got seaborne natural gas facility. And so it can take supplies from various sources depending on price attractiveness and so on and so forth. And at present, we are not only purchasing natural gas from the mainland, but we are also purchasing natural gas from other Asian locations and even Australia. And we do encourage power companies to diversify the source of supply for natural gas for power companies. Okay, I appreciate that. I think it's indeed important to diversify the source of supply. Now, about renewable energy. Now, it seems that the action plan is only pouring cold water over possible use of renewable energies. You are saying that the solar panels can only account for 1% savings, and also wind power generation is really very expensive. And it seems that you are still in lack of vision as well as target for the use of renewable energies. I think the government has to really do much more on this to come up with specific targets and policies, and that will make you more persuasive. Now, as for responsibility, earlier on I have come across an article saying that in terms of international shipping and international civil aviation, Hong Kong's emission really is very high. And that is why the Paris Agreement excludes international civil aviation, international shipping control. But in the long run, I think you have to set targets for those two areas as well. Now, for international civil aviation and international shipping, because we are talking about cross-boundary and cross-border issues. And that's why we've got 2 international organizations governing those. And for civil aviation, we already have ICAO governing things. And ICAO has already laid down target that by 2020, airlines will have to cut emission from their fleet. And there are 2 major measures. First, for the planes will have to be more energy efficient, and so the airlines are replacing their aging fleet. And secondly is the fuel. And there is a trend to add biofuels onto jet fuel. And all of these are already being tested. Okay, if you have written information, can you supply that to us? We really are really pressed for time, and we have to hand over the venue by 4:30. Okay, I still want to take that question concerning 2030 plus. If you look at page 13, there is a very brief introduction on that. But if you go onto our website, you will get more information, because we're talking about international conventions and treaties. Now, because that particular document is 100 pages, and that's why we have not distributed them to you. Now, we already have a motion on the floor, but before we deal with that, I have to ask some questions. Now, concerning the policy to exempt village housing with regard to environmental measures, I myself have gone online to look at the information, and you've got an independent webpage. It's called Hong Kong's RE webpage, and it sets something about direct connection and indirect connection and so on and so forth. I just want to know more. If we are talking about non-village housing structures, how will they be dealt with? And also about vertical installation of solar panels. Of course, there is a lot of sunlight in Hong Kong, but still you have to think about the cost effectiveness. I think a scheme whereby the solar panel can be adjusted in terms of angle of reception of sunlight is already being tested. I don't know whether Hong Kong has done any study in this regard. Can the solar panels be installed on an swiveling devices so that the solar panel can always be turned to face the sunlight? If you look at Hong Kong's geographical location, 23 degrees would be the optimal angle of reception for sunlight to be converted into power. Now, as for the vertical, fume PV panel has a lower rate of efficiency and conversion is because it is limited by its design, the nature of its design. Its conversion rate is necessarily lower. As for our support for village housing and other structures, we've got 2 streams. One stream is to target village houses with simple ownership. So how can a owner of a village house able to get clearance from the government department? We already issue a set of guidelines, and also what kind of technical support we can offer to such applicants. We also have a set of guidelines. And the other stream is that for connection to power companies' grid, solar energy can indeed affect the reliability of the traditional power grid, because if there is a power leakage, then it could affect the 2 power companies' traditional network, and that could collapse the whole power grid. And that's why we have issued another set of guidelines in order to deal with potential application of solar panels on a small scale by smaller structures in order to avoid affecting the overall power grid on a larger scale. Now, what about residential structures, say residential buildings, and if they want to install at the rooftop or at the water tanks at the rooftop to install solar panels, then do they have to engage authorized persons for clearance and for approval? And are you going to streamline application procedures in due course? Now, all you have to do is to go to our webpage and look at the information. Of course, I cannot generalize in saying that different PVs with different methods of installation and different weights might affect structural integrity of a particular building. However, if they can meet the requirements laid out in our webpage in terms of sizes and dimensions, they actually can skip quite a number of departments in terms of obtaining clearance. I think you have to make it as attractive as possible. Now, for second round of questions, we only have one member, Madam Kok Hui Fan, and still we've got another motion down the road to deal with. And so, do you mind only speaking for 3 minutes? No, thank you. Now, as for feed-in tariff, we are very happy to learn from the government that there is going to be certain guidelines for village housing's application. But for village houses to find feed-in tariff attractive, you really have to make it a very, very high level before it is attractive. I myself have visited Austria, and I have looked at their pilot scheme. And what they did was that some of their neighborhoods were being grouped into clusters. And for the tallest building in that particular community, it would be totally covered by the PV fumes at the exterior walls. It will be totally covered, and the power so generated would be immediately used by surrounding buildings, and the efficiency is very, very high. And for one of such a building that is being covered totally with PV fumes, it can generate more electricity than is needed for consumption, and they call it a zero plus scheme. I think if our target really is to enable more buildings and more village houses to use such a PV fumes, I think you have to think of more ways to offer incentives and also to make it more attractive. I think the Austrian experience is something that we can take reference from. I don't know whether it's workable in Hong Kong, but if you want to promote its use at commercial buildings or other type of buildings, what initiatives do you have in mind in order to encourage buildings to switch to this mode? Mr. Sit can let us know about a study that we have commissioned. As Madam Look has already pointed out, we have already done a test in Hong Kong to show how we can make it as straightforward and as simple as possible to apply for clearance for use of solar energy and application of solar panels. Now, approximately 1 square meters of solar panel can generate every year 120 points of electricity. And to give you an idea, an average family consumes 4,000 to 5,000 points of electricity every year. And so 1 square meters of solar panel can already generate 120 points of electricity. And if a particular family has to be self-sufficient, then 40 square meters of space will have to be used for installation of solar panels. But of course, Hong Kong is very, very congested, and we do not have sufficient space to fully achieve that. Of course, those are initial numbers, but still, can you supply them to us for reference? Right, now let's deal with Mr. Hui Chi-fung's motion. For environment protection, let's just put it on our screen. Right, we are now dealing with Mr. Hui Chi-fung's motion, and it is now being displayed on screen. I myself believe that this motion is directly relevant to our agenda item, and so if members don't have any objection, I'm going to ask Mr. Hui Chi-fung to read out slowly your motion. I beg your pardon because it's being written by pencil and I want to save paper. This council urges the government to, before introducing feed-in tariff, release information to this council and to public on the determination as well as a calculation method for proposed feed-in tariff level. And if members should not object, then we're going to sound the bell. It is now being put down in writing. Any response? We believe that this is totally acceptable to us. This is exactly what we're going to do anyway. Right, still we need to sound a bell. Is it necessary? All I can decide is whether it's pertinent to agenda item, because it is, and that's why we need to deal with it. But I need to call in our colleagues. So do you want to move on? You want to move on? Okay, move on.
We are 5 members short. We need 11. We are 3 members short. If you don't mind, I read out the motion to you. This panel urges the administration to, before implementing FIT, provide information to the public and the community on details of FIT and to formulate a timetable for implementation ASAP. The mover is Mr. Hui Chi-fung. All right. This is about to remind members to come back to vote on this motion. So we must wait till 5 minutes is up.
係投票之前，我哋都想同議員講多次，呢個係。
And before members vote on it, let me reiterate that we have no objection to this motion because we're going to do it anyway. We have no objection, all right?
話我哋支持咯。
Well, as I said, we support the motion.
我哋唔
係啦，其實咧就呢動議係冇約束力嘅，咁所以就。
The motion is not binding. It's not legally binding.
係啦，希望大家唔好介意。
I hope members don't mind. I can only decide whether the motion is relevant to this topic. Since it is, we have to proceed to vote. All right. Do we want a division? If not, a show of hands, please. Those who are for the motion, hands up, please. We have to count. $16.4. Hands down, please. Yes. 16.4. Any objection? No. Any abstention? No. Motion is passed. Mr. Ma Fung Kwok, you against it? I'd like to know why did you ring the quorum bell, the division bell? Well, we didn't have a quorum. Well, you're also a chairman of a panel. Perhaps in the HA panel, we should also do the same. Well, I can't read it. I hope you don't mind, because I decided to use this to replace hard copies of the motion. Since you're all here, we will start the next agenda item. Thank you very much. This is very important. This has nothing to do with politics. Now, this is called, it is about air quality. The Undersecretary is still here, and we have Mrs. Alice Zhang, Deputy Director of Environmental Protection Department, and Mr. Dave Ho, Acting Assistant Director, Mr. Brian Lau, Principal Environmental Protection Officer, and Mr. Terence Zhang, Principal Environmental Protection Officer.
好啊，多謝。
Thank you. Undersecretary.
係麻煩請開一開。
Please turn on the microphone for the Undersecretary, please. This is the progress of the review of AQO. In 2014 January, we updated our AQOs, and under the legislation, we have to conduct a review at least once every 5 years. We are now carrying out the review, which is rather comprehensive, and we have take reference to overseas practice in our review, and so this is just a technical progress, big report, because the review is not yet completed. We just want to tell you what we have done so far. After each meeting, the committees will upload their papers to the website. The review will be completed by the end of this year, and then the committees will then submit papers to the Secretary for the Environment. And after we have discussed the papers internally, we're going to conduct a public consultation. Because if we have to amend AQOs, we have to amend the legislation, and therefore a public consultation has to be conducted, and then after that we will introduce a bill to the Council. Thank you. please refer to Annex E for the work plan. All right, a show of hands, please, so that I can. All right. Hon HUI Chi-fung, Corporate Fan, and Leung Yu-chung, Frankie Yik. Right, 4 minutes. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Thank you. Under Secretary, about 4 years ago, the first PAC report I worked on was on air quality, and we discussed WHO standards and also the various pollutants in our AQO, and how come some of the objectives were lower, some were higher. If I may refer you to Annex A, I know you are still working on the AQOs. Now, I will not ask any more questions on ozone because we have asked a number of times and we understand how come ozone has not reached WHO standards. But what about sulfur dioxide? Sulfur dioxide is related to fuel used by vessels and vehicles. Our interim target is a far cry from that of WHO. I understand that in the coming year there will continue to be measures to control the quality of diesel used by marine vessels. So I'd like to know for sulfur dioxide, what is your progress? In formulating a new objective, are you going to attain the WHO interim target 2 or even the highest standard under WHO? And what is the greatest source of SO2 emission? Are we talking about marine vessels or roadside plants or power generators? My colleague can supplement. The largest source of SO2 emission in Hong Kong is marine vessels. Of course, we still have coal-fired generating units, which are also a major source of SO2. We are taking drastic measures to tackle this. Starting from the 1st of July 2015, we have put in place controls for emission from marine vessels. We have seen an improvement in 50% of SO2 emissions. By 2019, in the whole of PRD, there will be even more improvement under national policies. Mr. Leung is asking whether we can attain target 2 T2. Yes, we do have that possibility. So if our AQO is tightened, we will see whether we can move a step further. Any response from other officials? Mrs. Zhou? Yes, some data for Mr. Leung's information. Except our Under Secretary, the greatest source of SO2 emission is marine vessels. According to our list, in 2015, they accounted for 59%, and the second is from our power companies, 37%. We hope that in the next year panel, we can brief members on 2 new measures to control emissions from marine vessels and power companies. Thank you, Mr. Frankie Yik. May I refer you to Annex B? I have some comments on the proposals here. On D1, to introduce interchange schemes at busy road sections. It's proposed that there should be one at Mei Fu. Already A decade ago, I said that at the police recreation club at Boundary Street, there should be an interchange and everyone should switch to electric buses or whatsoever. There should be a circular route from there to Tsim Sha Tsui to greatly enhance the use of electric buses so as to lower the pollution along Nathan Road and F5 to enhance district-based publicity on bus route rationalization. I'm disappointed that you have not achieved the targets on bus route rationalization. The success rate has been low so far. I hope that the Environment Bureau can work harder on this. And page 14.
H1. I've got a question here. It is not directly relevant to air pollution. Here it says that newly registered vehicles will have to meet new requirements. Of course, these are affluent requirements. But what I can see is that after a license is being issued, then the vehicle operator may deliberately convert or modify the vehicle, and they modified the vehicle exhaust pipe so that it becomes more polluting than before. But it seems that enforcement is lacking. And then H, it says there should be a public transport network that is well connected and also that is very conducive to air quality improvement. And actually, I'm proposing that there should be public transport lane instead of just bus lane, incorporating also minibuses and also taxis, because taxis and minibuses are also part of public transport. And the Secretary, Mr. Zhang, has indicated that he's willing to look into it. I hope that you can really redouble your efforts, because if there is indeed a public transport lane, then it could really ease public congestion, public traffic congestion, because at present certain bus lanes are underutilized. And Annex C A4. Now, for ocean-going vessels being berthed, the target should become 0.1% in terms of shipboard diesel. We are not objecting to it. We hope that, however, this is applicable across the board in PRD, because the difference in cost between 1.1% and 0.5% is really $1 for every kg. And so if you do not apply it across the board at PRD, then Hong Kong's port would be very highly disadvantaged. Thank you, Mr. Yu Chi-ming. Mr. Hui Chi-fung. I can see that in Hong Kong's air quality targets, for suspended particulates and minute particulates, I'm sorry I have to use the English terms. I'm talking about PM 2.5 and PM 10. If you look at our present targets, actually there is room for us to move towards T2, which would be closer to WHO requirement. Now, is it that the government is still sticking to old targets instead of moving ahead to TO or T2, which is closer to WHO target? Of course, we are not advocating that we should immediately meet WHO target, but you could also raise your own bar a little bit so that you're at least closer to it. Now, I just want to say that the purpose for this review is to become more ambitious. Now, what is going to be your conclusion? Are you going to be more ambitious? I think we have to wait until the review is completed before I can answer your question. Okay, so the government doesn't yet have a position on it yet. I think for ourselves, we should use WHO's highest requirement as our target. Now, indeed, we hope that the data that you collect from this review can convince you that we should indeed move a step ahead. Now, my second point is about the overall AQO exercise shows that the government indeed has done something, but not all of its work is actually directly effective. For instance, SO2, the government has indeed done some work to bring it down. But this is something that is not visible or felt by members of the public, nor can they participate in this exercise. But do you have any measures that can be visible by members of the public and that can be felt by members of the public? Now, for instance, electric buses, roadside pollution is very keenly felt by members of the public. Or cycling really is a very directly effective method in order to reduce emission. But still, you are saying that you are not encouraging cycling in built-up area. Now, as for electric vehicles, you are actually reducing subsidy. If you still set the tax concession as $9,500, it is not going to be attractive enough to make the majority of our vehicle fleet to go electric. And so what measures will you actually take? I really don't understand too much the logic. I think the most important point, of course, is emission reduction. What happened is that during the past 4 years, our air quality actually has improved in leaps and bounds. Of course, some may say that it seems that we now have more blue sky, but others say otherwise. So you are saying that we should have more visible measures so that the members of the public understand that we are actually doing something concrete. I really don't understand the logical relationship here. I hope that members of this council can help us on this front instead. During the past few years, indeed, we have invested money as well as efforts in improving our air quality, and indeed, the air quality has improved very significantly. And I hope that you help us in spreading this positive message around. As for the other areas that we are still working on, then of course we'll continue to work on them. Madam Hon Hui Chi-fung, of course, air quality has improved during the past few years, but of course there is no limit to how much we want our air quality to become better. Of course, if there are a lot of vehicles and a lot of people, air quality definitely will suffer. And of course, we want to encourage people to switch to non-polluting vehicles, such as electric vehicles. But the government this year has abolished the tax exemption for electric vehicles. So what is going to be the goal of the government now? Do you still want to encourage people to use electric vehicles? Are you going to increase roadside charging facilities as well as roadside electric vehicles meters so that more people would find it attractive to use electric vehicles, or are you simply going to stop here? Regarding the changes to the first registration subsidy for electric vehicles, we are targeting private vehicles, not commercial vehicles, because the facts on the ground say that electric vehicles application is really moving very, very fast on private vehicles. And so for very popular brands of electric vehicles, the prices have already come down, and so we don't want to encourage people anymore on this front. And of course, the best thing is for people to switch to public transport altogether. As for commercial vehicles, we still need to promote use of electric vehicles, because on the whole, commercial vehicles are polluting much more than private vehicles. And that is why for commercial vehicles, we'll need to increase our efforts. And of course, we have our green transport trial fund. And after testing a range of vehicles, our conclusion is that small size trucks and lorries are the best candidate for use of electricity for propulsion. Commercial vehicles have a certain mode of charging their vehicles, and we are still working with the commercial sector to come up with a technology that can really charge their electric vehicles in a very efficient manner and meet their operational needs. As for charging stations, of course, that is still a challenge for us. We've got around 1,000 on the road or roadside charging stations. Private vehicles can already charge their vehicles at their workplaces or their residences. And we already have GFA exemption for buildings to provide charging stations. But we still need to come up with a viable option for commercial vehicles charging stations and their locations and their distribution. Do you have any target? Of course, you say that you're targeting small-sized trucks. Then do you have a target as to, say, before a certain date, how many of the small-sized trucks in Hong Kong should go electric? And do you have sufficient support measures to make that happen? And when is your study as well as viability research on the provision of charging stations for commercial vehicles be completed and data will be available? Now, there are no hard targets, but at present, commercial vehicles only have small numbers that have gone electric. I can tell you honestly that we do not yet have a timetable for coming up with a target for charging stations for commercial vehicles, as the research is still ongoing. Mr. Leung Yu-chung. Electric vehicles are greener and they are less polluting. But electric vehicles use electricity. But generation of electricity can also cause pollution. So this is a vicious cycle. So you may reduce pollution in certain areas, but in other areas you may increase pollution caused by generation of electricity. I think the best solution still is to reduce the absolute number of vehicles. Hong Kong really has more vehicles than roads to accommodate them, and congestion is serious. And when there is congestion, then GHG will be produced in large amounts. And so how can you attack the problem at the source? And roadside pollution really is quite serious. And you are not willing to place monitoring stations in urban areas. And we have proposed certain locations be installed with monitoring stations, but you said no. Say for very busy locations such as Bangkok, you only say that the pollution is very serious, but you fail to tell us exactly how serious it is. And so are you willing to attack the problem at its root? Indeed, this is something we are concerned about. First, do we have sufficient data to show that at busy locations such as Bangkok? Do we have relevant data as to how serious the pollution is? Indeed, actually, we have such data, and so it is not arguable that it is indeed subject to very serious pollution. Now, for the next term of the government, if they have the will, they come up with something that is very specific, very concrete in terms of target and goals. I hope that this council will support it. Now, if you look at FRT and if you look at vehicles-related measures, you know that actually the government is already doing something in order to limit the growth of number of vehicles in Hong Kong. I hope that in future, when such issues are being discussed, there will be a lot of controversy and a lot of argument. If you look at the Planning Department's 230 plus, if you look at our papers on climate change and on energy use, you know that we are willing to take the issue by the horn, i.e., to tackle the issue of growth in number of vehicles. But exactly how this problem is to be addressed, we have to await the next term of government and its measures. And when those measures are available, we hope that you will support them. Of course, there will be a switch of government, but I don't think the personnel is going to be that much changed. Now, this term of government has had a term of office of 5 years and is now close to the end of its term. It seems that so far you have not tackled the problem at its root. You only provide band-aid solutions such as switching to electricity vehicles and also electricity charging stations. But that is really not the fundamental solution. That is not attacking the problem by the root. Undoubtedly, pollution in places like Central and Mongkok is very, very serious. But how serious it is? Because air quality affects our health. I do not have hard evidence, but I heard that 300 and 400 people die from lung cancers every year. And so this is indeed a very serious health risk. For monitoring stations, we have monitoring stations at roadside. We've got 3 of them at roadside, Mongkok, Causeway Bay, and Central. And also we've got monitoring stations in other urban areas such as Mongkok, Shamshipo, and Kwun Tong, and also in new towns and in other locations in Hong Kong. So we have data on the intensity of pollution at those locations.
We don't need to argue about the roadside emission situation. We all agree that it is serious, and I actually share the view of Mr. Leung. Mr. Roy Kwong, according to a Clean Air campaign, I hope you can really take on board our suggestions, because in 2019 you are going to tell us what will be the revised AQOs. I think you agree with me that air pollution is associated with people's health. Will you take into account public health or humans' health in your review of AQO? In 2013 May, when the document was published, in almost the first or second paragraph of the document, we said that air quality is very crucial to human health, and we have subgroups to look at science and health. That's the subgroup on air science and health. So rest assured, we will not overlook the impact of air pollution on health. Yes, air pollution is worrying in Hong Kong. Many green groups and members of the public are very concerned. We need free air, and many people say that our AQOs are a far cry from WHO standards. So can you give us a timetable as to when we can be closer to WHO standards? Well, towards the end of this year, the review should be over, and then we will have a report to the Secretary for the Environment. After internal consultation, the AQOs will be revised and legislation is needed. Prior to that, we will conduct a public consultation. And as my colleague said, before the end of this year, there should be a few rounds of exchanges with the public, and we will only, or rather, the working group will only conclude its work after another round of public engagement. So we really want to exchange views with members of the public and experts Although in our working group we've got representatives from the universities and medical sector, I think this is going to be a long-term battle. We need the efforts of the government and also the civic community, and members of the public should also be involved. So how can we do a good job? We should start from ourselves, and I hope the administration can take note of actions from the civic society or the community. You have a measure on pedestrian friendly, and you want to utilize intelligent transport system that is found in C and E. Now, for pedestrian friendly, it sounds easy, but in fact it's difficult to achieve because Hong Kong is getting hotter and hotter. I haven't been to Singapore for a long time. It's heard that in Singapore they sprinkle water to cool down the ambient air, and more planting is also done. I don't know how are you going to make our environment pedestrian friendly and transport intelligence system. Well, if the transport department can't do it, how can you force it? Is the Bureau too kind? Because many of your policies have to involve other bureaus or departments, and it's not easy for you to push other bureaus to cooperate with you. In fact, our health is at stake. Although you mentioned in your document that you care for the health of the public, that is not the same as admitting in a straightforward manner that poor air will harm our health. So how are you going to fight with other bureaus and departments? I know it is difficult. So what tactics do you have? Let me share with you my personal observations. Because in the review process, I play the role of the chairman. We have had a few dozens of meetings. I think I've chaired all of them with the exception of one because I was out of town. In the working group, we have both officials and non-officials. We have representatives from the THB and the DB, and also from the D of H. I think more and more we feel that our views are converging, and this signifies a change in society. If we can, through planning, make our city more livable, or there will be improvements in all environmental protection or health indicators. I do not see major resistance from other departments, but it boils down to technical feasibility. Take walkability as an example. The THB is already working on some of it, and it's not that it hasn't got any plans. But green groups may be thinking of making a Dover Road vehicle-free. This may not be what we are thinking in the administration. That doesn't mean that THB thinks that walkability is not important. Please don't misunderstand that we have resistance within the administration. And for occupational health, well, we have exchanged our views with the LWB, and WHO has said that air quality and health are very important. We have officials to take part in their discussions. Perhaps this is the right time for us to move forward. As regards whether our legislation can be improved and how we can implement these measures better. I think we have the conditions to do that. Mr. Hui Chi-fung and Mr. Kenneth Leung, 3 minutes. I like to ask further questions on the promotion of electrical vehicles. The administration doesn't want our traffic to get worse, and therefore it has decided to remove the incentives for buying electric vehicles. But I think we can encourage people to switch to electric vehicles. Why don't you launch a 1-for-1 campaign? That is, if you can show a certificate to prove that an old diesel car has been dismantled, then you can get some incentive to buy an electric vehicle. That is one way to clean up our air quality, and at the same time without adding more vehicles. Why isn't it done? Under Secretary, well, personally, I am willing to consider these measures. You talk about a 1-for-1 exchange. Sometimes the vehicles may not be available because for old diesel vehicles, they are old and emissions are high. But if it is a luxury private car, you talked about a 1-for-1 exchange, or what should we do with the old vehicle replaced? I have no objection to your proposal, but if really to introduce such a measure, we're going to affect a lot of people because we're talking about private vehicles. And how is that going to impact on the secondary car market? I have no objection to introducing more measures, but we must think through them. Won't you go for the easy bit first? Now you want to curb the growth of private vehicles, then you have to remove incentives, you increase first registration tax, so on and so forth. But for replacing old vehicles with electric vehicles, I don't think there is any objection, so long as the level is right. When electric vehicles are more or less of the same price as same class diesel vehicles, many people will go for the former. However, the administration has ignored our suggestions many times. So why don't you go for this easy option first? Thank you, Mr. Hui Chi-fung. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Thank you, Chairman. Under Secretary, I have discussed with you a number of times that you should start with electric public transport vehicles, and then you should encourage people to replace their old vehicles, old private cars with electric vehicles. I know the electric bus pilot scheme has been in progress for more than 3 years. It's not really true that you have a technical problem. Rather, it is the mode of charging that restrict the number of bus routes we can deploy electric buses. So when can you give us a detailed and comprehensive technical analysis of this subject? You've been trying out different models and brands of electric buses. We'd like to know the actual problems you encounter and you cannot overcome in the trial, because the public would like to know, so that we can put our wisdom together and come up with a feasible option that is acceptable to different parties. Because the emissions from public transport vehicles are the main source of pollution. You have carried out been working on the trial scheme for a few years, but you have not achieved any breakthrough so far. We subsidize franchise bus companies to purchase 36 single deck electric buses. Only 12 have been delivered, and five started last year, and another 5 started in March. Another 2 has also started. One of the difficulties with electric vehicles, Hong Kong has got many steep slopes, and in the summer, the humidity and temperature are high, and therefore there is a greater demand for air conditioning. So buses need a greater power to climb steep gradients. So bus companies spent a long time to discuss with suppliers on specifications for electric vehicles in Hong Kong. So the first batch was only delivered in late 2015. Yes, please go on. At first, there were many hiccups, and even diesel vehicles would have these problems. Problems with the doors and tires, and after a certain length of trial, there is a greater demand for air conditioning. So once charged, a bus cannot have power for a whole day operation. And 5 buses have been delivered, and they have encountered other problems, problems with the tires and the steering wheels, so on and so forth. And for the super electric buses, super capacity buses, the charging point is at the top of the bus.
They need to be charged overhead, and because of that, the connecting point is very important. Otherwise, there'll be risks of sparks being generated, and so it had consumed a lot of lead time, and so it was only put into practice this March. And we really need longer testing time for the scheme to be put to test to see whether it's viable. I have to apologize for Mr. Hui. I think it's very helpful for us to know more about this. Mr. Law. Okay, I'll give you time. You've got 4 minutes. Thank you. First, about electronic road pricing. I don't know whether it's been covered. I think the government has already done a 3-month consultation. In 2015, the government has done 3 such exercises, and that's why the government is sitting on a huge amount of data collected from consultation. And of course, some problems have been identified, for instance, privacy, and also in areas like Central, you might need an alternative road, and the Central and Wan Chai bypass is going to be completed very, very soon. And so objectively, the environment is already ripe for such a scheme to be put to test. But still, the government is saying that there is no consensus in the community. So why is it that the government feels that there is no consensus, even though the objective environment is already ripe for a trial? Indeed, we've been talking about this for over 2 decades, and still it's not being introduced. Now for ERP, this has been covered by the task force on road traffic. The government is going to implement a pilot scheme, and the government has already done public involvement consultation, and views have been collected and views have been published. The government is now running a more detailed feasibility study, and then these will be put to the public again for another consultation. Do you have a timeline? I don't have the information. So you are running a feasibility study. You must have a projected completion date. Let me give you an answer in writing, because the transport department really is the lead department here, and that's why we cannot give you the latest information, and so we'll get it from transport department and pass it on to you in due course. The pilot scheme, of course, is different from the long-term scheme as mentioned in the paper. And the pilot scheme is not going to wait till 2030. The pilot scheme is going to go ahead very soon. Is that right? Indeed, the pilot scheme will go ahead first. So it is quite separate from the long-term measures for 2030. Let me clarify. This paper is about the present review on air quality objectives and expert views and conclusions generated by our task force. When the task force discussed it, indeed, it discussed electronic road pricing. And so at the level of this paper, it is supposed to be a long-term initiative. But at the task force discussion, the TH Bureau also indicated that even though this may be a long-term initiative, but the pilot scheme, they are already working on it and it's going to go ahead sooner. Now, for some of the proposals, the government has run an EIA in 2014, but now some of the numbers have already exceeded the 2014 numbers. So do you have a steer for relevant public works and other projects that they should try their best to meet 2014 objectives? Indeed, we have already drawn a line as to what public works will have to follow the new objectives and what public works can still follow old objectives. I don't know exactly where the line is being drawn. Actually, we have a very specific table there to indicate where the line is being drawn. We can dig up the information and pass it on to you. Mr. Zhang, please pass it on to us in writing. For new projects, they have to follow new objectives. To put it simply. Thank you so much. Now, AOB, do you have any AOB? No? Thank you so much for attending. Right, the next meeting will be beyond July 1st.